Newspaper, the Missoulian. City, Missoula, Montana. Date, Sunday, March 31st, 1929. Article title, Missoula Veteran Tells Story. J.L. Humble remembers days of old Fort Corvallis when the Nez Perce came. Tale of Stronghold, 1877. J.L. Humble of Missoula is one of the few survivors of the men who built the old fort at Corvallis in 1877. 4 companies of militia had been formed for protection. Mr. Humble was captain of the Corvallis Company, one of the 3 companies that started out to meet the Nez Perce Indians. Mr. Humble had served with the 16th Missouri Cavalry in the Civil War and was on Price's raid through Missouri, and during the troublesome times of 1877 was one of the men who had military experience and looked to as a leader. Mr. Humble has given the following account of the passing of the Nez Perce Indians through the Bitter Root Valley. On July 28, 1877, the Nez Perce Indians were coming over the Lolo Trail. They proposed to go through the Bitter Root Valley. We formed 4 companies of militia. Captain John B. Catlin from Skullcaho, my company from Corvallis, Captain R.W. Martin, and Captain John Landers from Stevensville. Catlin's company and my company and Martin's company decided to go up the Lolo with the soldiers. Captain Ron of the regular army and Captain Logan had but a few men. When we arrived there, Captain Ron put me in charge of the pickets. That evening, we had a powwow with the Nez Perce Indians. The next day, we had another one. Looking Glass seemed to be the spokesman for the Indians, and Delaware Jim, a Nez Perce Indian from Stevensville, was Captain Ron's interpreter. The second day we had another powwow with the Indians, Chief Joseph positively declining to surrender and give up his arms and outfit to Captain Ron. I told Captain Ron that there were too many for us. It was useless for us to try to fight them. He said he was an officer in the army. I said, "Yes, but you don't have to get yourself killed." I told him that I had soldiered myself and was in several battles. I said, "It's easy to get in, but hard to get out. If you're going to fight those Indians, I am going to take my men and get out." The citizens were crazy to get into a fight. I said, "You don't know what you're going to get into." The next morning, Captain Ron promised me he would not fight them. The pickets were standing out along a ridge going up on the north side of the creek. The Indians asked me if they could have that ridge to get out. I told them yes. They said they did not want to fight the citizens and would go through the valley and not molest anything. So we had the third powwow with the Indians. Chief Joseph refused to give up his arms or ammunition to Captain Ron. The Indians could talk the English language and were still asking if they could have that ridge. I told them yes. The 4th morning, the Indians came down and wanted the ridge. I told them they could have it. I moved the pickets below. They started up the ridge. I went down to camp and told Captain Ron the Indians were coming and to keep his men very quiet and nobody would be hurt. People came up from Missoula a time or two and wanted Ron to fight the Indians. They thought it was fun. The Indians went over the ridge without any trouble and without molesting anybody. We stayed there until the Indians had left for some little time. I didn't tell my men that we had an agreement with the Indians. The men wanted to know how they were going to get home with the Indians ahead of us. When we came along, The Indians had camped early and arranged their camp very nicely. They were on a little bit of a knoll, and when we came along they yelled, "Hello" to the Indians, and the Indians said, "Go on, go on." Then we went to Fort Owen, where our families were. The Indians went up the valley leisurely and did not molest anything. General Gibbons came and followed the Indians up. I had a talk with him in Corvallis. He wanted us to go as far as Ross Hole with him. When we got to Ross Hole, they were taking the hill. I told my men that they would make a dry camp, and we would stop on Rye Creek and stay all night. Next morning we caught up with them before they had had their breakfast. After breakfast, General Gibbons sent for me to come down to his camp. He wanted me to take my company and go with Lieutenant Bradley and locate the Indians. I told him it was a very rough country, and I would furnish him 4 or 6 mountaineers, and he to furnish the same, and we would locate the Indians. I refused to take my company and go with Bradley. He reported that in his camp, Myron Lockwood, one of my company, came up and wanted to see the color of the fellow's hair that refused to go. I said, "Mr. Lockwood, you'd better look at mine. I'm the man. If you get into a scrap with those Indians, you will know you have been somewhere." He got wounded 3 times and his brother got killed. I told my men that that was as far as I proposed to go, and that I was not out fighting women and children. I said, "I'm going home, and all of you that want to go can go with Captain Catlin." Nels McGillen, one of my company, was at Corvallis when General Howard came along. He told him he would give him $100 to take a dispatch to General Gibbons. McGillen landed in Gibbons' camp about 1 o'clock at night. He passed the wagons within 200 yards of the train, was not halted, and saw nobody. He reported to Gibbons that the wagons were not there. He thought that he had no supplies. No one halted him in Gibbons' camp. He returned with another dispatch to Howard. He told us about the fight, who was killed and who was wounded. I got 3 men with me and a 4-horse team, and we took supplies and medicine to relieve the boys. We went over the Ross Hole Hill on a very dark night. 6 men that had deserted the camp knew our voices and wanted something to eat. We met the boys about 6 miles this side of the battleground as they were coming home. Corvallis, March 30th. More than 50 years ago, settlers of the present peaceful Bitterroot Valley found it necessary to build a fort near here to protect themselves and families from the warring tribe of Nez Perce Indians. The fort was erected beside the present highway from Missoula, a quarter of a mile south of Corvallis. The fort was on the west side of the road. The Corvallis Women's Club recently dedicated a monument to mark the site of the old fort that sheltered the settlers for a week during the Nez Perce uprising in 1877. The monument is a native stone, 4 feet high and 3 feet square at the base, tapering to 6 inches at the top, in which a copper plate is cemented. The plate was a gift from the Anaconda Copper Mining Company to the Corvallis Women's Club. J.B. Mitchell and Aquila Wilkerson of Hamilton were present at the unveiling ceremonies in December. Both were residents of the district at that time. Following is a history of the fort, supplied by James Mitchell. On the 9th of July, 1877, the men of Corvallis and vicinity met to build a fort for the protection of themselves and families from the Nez Perce Indians, who were then on the warpath and headed this way. 12 married men with their teams and 6 single men selected a site sanctioned by Charles Hawley on whose ground the fort was to be built. they proceeded to level the fences on each side of the ground, leaving not one rail upon another. The fort was to be built of sod, which was obtained in the fields of Mr. Hawley, Elijah Chaffin, Jack Slack, and Joseph Hull. The first cut was made on Mr. Hawley's place. The dimensions of the fort were about 100 feet square, 12 feet high, having a base 3 feet thick, this continuing to the portholes about 4 feet, then gradually decreasing until they were only 18 inches on top of the walls. One opening was made on the east side, and this was closed by a door 6 inches thick, made of heavy planks. A well was dug in the center of the enclosure, and necessary conveniences were provided for the settlers. When the fort was finished, Riley Cooper took a .45 caliber rifle with a range of 100 yards and, stepping off 80 yards, fired into the wall. The ball penetrated 10 inches, proving that the walls were sufficient for protection. The fort was completed on the 19th and 20th day of the month, and on a Sunday, while the people were meeting in, word came up the valley that the Indians were then at Lolo. About dark of that day, the worst electric storm I have ever seen in the Bitterroot, came and drenched everybody and everything in the place. The men representing the heads of families in the fort were Elijah Chaffin, William Chaffin, Joseph Hill, Reverend W.A. Hall, John McCarty, John Goff, Jacob Goff, Milton Chaffin, John A. Black, James H. Cowan, and Newman Hodges, William Mitchell, Squire Maddox, J. L. Humble, and Charles Hawley. Single men whom I remember were John A. Hummel, Gilbert Robinson, Wes Wilkerson, I. M. Johnson, Riley Cooper, and Jimmy Chaffin. Campbell Mitchell, Alex Chaffin, my brother, and myself. Some of the people lived in tents while others built rude shacks. All were supplied with food to withstand a long siege, and the men having cows in pasture nearby milked them and furnished a plentiful supply. When the Indians passed through the valley on their way to the Big Hole, the largest part of the band went on the west side of the river. Chief Joseph and 40 or 50 of his warriors came to Corvallis and visited the fort. They evidenced considerable curiosity, but did not offer to molest anything. Of course, they were not allowed inside the enclosure. They wanted to buy ammunition, but P.R. Young informed them he would sell them nothing, and they went on. Slack and Young owned a store in Corvallis at that time. There was no sickness in the fort, and the people lived in peace and harmony until after the Big Hole battle, August 9th, returning to their homes on August 14th. The old fort stood until sometime in the early 90s when it was torn down.